Hello, this is Derek from One Over Tea and Tao Teaware and the Empty Cup Studio. Welcome back to another episode of Tea Soup, a podcast all about tea culture, life in modern China, and Chinese tea. I'm your host, Derek Poskin. I've been living in China since 2016, and I've been drinking, buying, and selling Chinese tea for the past decade. So, pop on that kettle, heat up your teaware, and let's get this session started. Alright, so as promised, this episode is still the Year of the Dragon in review, but I will focus primarily on tea and teaware and a little bit of the Empty Cup Studio, trying to hit all of those three things because as you picked up in the last episode, last year for me, the Year of the Dragon was a very big year and a lot happened. And I managed to talk for a whole hour about things that were not related to tea, and so as promised this time, I will just really go into all the tea stuff that happened because last year, as I mentioned, we grew significantly. We got a lot of new customers, a lot of return customers, a lot of wholesale customers, and a lot of new teas as well. It seems like the more we do this, the longer we do this, just the better we get at it. And when I say the better we get at it, I've talked before about how having a company is like having a problem generating machine that just creates a lot of problems for you. Though at some point it's this frustration where it's like everything's new, and then at some point it becomes old where it's like this thing happened again. Oh, I know how to solve that. This thing happened again. I know how to solve that. A new tea comes up and I can very quickly tell you if it's a good tea that people are interested in, or a tea that maybe only Alex and I are interested in, and maybe we shouldn't really put all of our eggs into that basket. And so I think 2024, the Year of the Dragon, was a year that, we really kind of found our pace for that. And so I want to go through and talk about kind of my takes on the teas we found, the teas we started selling, and not really make any overarching estimations about the state of the tea market at large, but a little more just about, what's working for us, what we've found, what teas are really popular that we are sourcing. In addition to just the teas, I also want to lean a little more heavily on the work I've been doing for Tao Teaware, right? This is my other company with Dart, where we buy a bunch of teaware from China. I ship it by boat to America, and then he ships it domestically within there. And so a lot of people can get teapots, teacups, sky wands, and stuff from Tao Teaware if they're living in the States within like 2 days, which for me, this has always been one of the biggest drawbacks of having a tea company in China. Even though we can ship worldwide, even though we've shipped to over 50 countries in the past 6-7 years, it takes 2 weeks. It takes 3 weeks, sometimes over a month. Sometimes I get an email from really patient customers that have been waiting for like 2 months, 3 months. And I'm just like, oh my God, thank you for waiting so long. Your tea got shipped back to us and we shipped it back there. It's in customs, stuff like that. I mean, for me, for the longest time, that's the nature of the tea game. And so I've always wanted to have a reliable partner back stateside that could help me ship the tea immediately as soon as people place orders. So far, it's delineated. We have One River Tea based in China, Tao Teaware based in America. But at the same time, a lot of the work I'm doing for Tao Teaware is basically the same stuff I'm doing for One River Tea. I'm going to famous teaware regions. I'm meeting with people that are making teapots, and I'm learning the whole process from start to finish. This is exactly what I do when I go out to the Wudang Mountains and spend time with Wen Zitong, and I see the pickers, I see the yield, I see all of his processes, and I have this deeper understanding of how to get this final result. And so I'm doing the exact same thing with Tao Teaware as well. And this is, I'm a little late with this one because it's already March. And so it's been we're a few months into the Year of the Snake here. And in some places in Sichuan, they're already picking and making tea. Even in Chaozhou, they're almost ready to start making the new Dansong oolongs. And I'm looking back at all of the places I've been in the 2024, in the year of the dragon. All the places I went to, the people I met, the teas I sourced. That's the nature of this episode. But what I've also been doing is I've been looking at all of the videos I've recorded, the photos I've taken. I'm so far behind on all of my YouTube videos for, the tea and the teaware sourcing. And so while I do have a YouTube channel, I've kind of rebranded it. It was initially One River Tea, but then it started becoming more like 80% this tea soup podcast. And I have a lot of videos about Tao teaware, like me sourcing stuff for Tao teaware. I have videos about, obviously sourcing tea and making tea. I'm going to start posting videos about making the tea studio and stuff like that. And so it's slowly becoming less and less about One River Tea and more just about, my life here in China and all of the parts of that, which is an interesting branding decision to kind of move away from One River Tea and just lean into this like Derek Poskin brand, I guess, as the hub of it all. Because in the YouTube channel, the previously One River Tea YouTube channel, the reason we got so popular is I made one off-the-wall video about how to make Chinese incense in China. And that's the video that blew up. It has 110,000 views. And people just that's my most popular video by far and has nothing to do with tea. Ugh. That's just the nature of the beast, though. Right? You can't quite pick what's going to really become popular, but as a result, that's kind of got me thinking that video is not even about tea, right? And I'm doing so much more that's not just One River Tea, even including this podcast. And so with that all said, I will look at this year in review, and while it's all going to be about tea culture, it's not necessarily only going to be about tea, because the first place I went this year, in the year of the dragon, was to Jingdezhen, a famous teaware producing region in China, essentially the Mecca of Chinese porcelain. This is that Qinghua, that blue and white porcelain that's really just iconic China. Now, trips to Jingdezhen are always special for me because the best way to get to Jingdezhen from my city in Yangzhou is to take a sleeper train. The sleeper trains in China are really cool, really just, very systematic, very homogeneous, where it's like, okay, there's the hard sleeper and the soft sleeper. Soft sleeper is four beds, like one bunk bed on each side, and a compartment door that closes. The hard sleepers have 6 beds, 3 beds on each side, and a compartment door that does not close, and the lights that kind of stay on all the time. And it's pretty much like this throughout the whole of China. What you do is you buy a ticket to one of those, you give the person, the railway worker, your ticket, and then they give you a little token, like a plastic token, and they mark it down. And what they will do is they will come and wake you up because they have entrusted you with their plastic token, and they need to get that token back from your unconscious body. It's best done if they wake you up and they give you your ticket back and you give them their plastic token back, and then they can let you leave. They'll I've had them shake my feet. It's kind of weird. They just pat on the bed or something like that, because I'll be dead asleep, and then my exit happens at 4:30 in the morning. Right, and they'll open the door, bang on the bed at 4 a.m. and be like, your station's next. And it's really nice that they have this system. And I love China is so casual about that, where it's just there's somebody here to come and wake you up. No hard feelings. He's gonna make sure you wake up out of this bed. And so, as I mentioned, the trip to Jingdezhen, it's actually I have to get off I think it's 4:50 in the morning or something like that. And so I always get woken up in the middle of the night from that. Now, I mentioned the hard sleepers and soft sleepers, the compartments with 6 people and the compartments with 4 people. What you're doing here is you're trying to reduce the risk of getting a snorer in your compartment. And so you pay for that extra chance to get somebody who's not snoring, because it's 1 1 in 6 people, I'm sure, are just terrible, terrible snorers. And yeah, when you're in a compartment and somebody's snoring, it's so hard, especially when you don't know them and you can't like throw a pillow at them or like push them or something like that. So for me, going to Jingdezhen is always special because of this, because it's also a roll of the dice on who you get there. Like not only if they snore, but if they're like friendly people that talk to you. I remember my friend, she was traveling through China the first time up to Xi'an. She had a night train and she gets into a compartment. It's a hard sleeper and there are like 5 old men, like old grandpas. And they're all like playing cards and just like talking really loud. And she's like, yeah, it was a wild ride for 8 hours. And she has the story of like giving them a Werther's original, like a caramel. She gives the guy a caramel. He pops it into his mouth and then immediately just like opens his mouth and lets it fall to the ground and shakes his head no. He like did not like it, that caramel. But yeah, so this train ride was very fun for me every time, because a lot of times like if I go with my friends, I'll get like, we'll get a compartment to ourselves. This time I actually went with my wife, who was then my girlfriend, I guess, not even my fiance yet. So it was a really cool tea sourcing trip to go with her and kind of show her what I do, right? Sourcing tea, sourcing teaware and stuff like that. And so it was nice to have that extra company and like, yeah, just to be with somebody on the whole trip. One surprising boon about arriving in Jingdezhen at like 5 in the morning before the sun rises is the ghost market. If you don't know about this, there is an antique market, an illicit, illegal antique market of people that are selling old pieces of teaware that they've, found through the excavation of the land. Because Jingdezhen has, over 1,000-year history of making ceramics, and there are old kilns. They're literally there's so much pottery buried in the earth in Jingdezhen that every time people do constructions on buildings, they'll unearth a bunch of old teaware from like the Qing dynasty and the Ming dynasty, like hundreds of years old. And this all is by law property of Jingdezhen, property of China, belongs in a museum, right? And so what people have taken to doing is they will hawk that stuff, not during the daytime, but in the middle of the night, like the pre-dawn hours. And it's, eventually kind of become a thing where the government like turns a blind eye to it, like, okay, sure, don't really mind so much. It was closed down during COVID for a while. And to tell you the truth, it is largely fake stuff there. What's interesting is it's easy to make fake pottery. It's kind of funny to think about, where it's just like, if you make something, I think it's like the gufang in the Chinese, like made to look old, or jiuzhou, like made old, you just make it without using a lot of skill. You make it poorly, you fire it poorly, you chip it, you bury it in the earth for a while, you dig it back up, and then you sell it for 10 times the price in the middle of the night, early morning. And so I've been to the ghost market a few times. It's a really fun atmosphere to be in, and it's only around from like 4:30 in the morning until like 6 a.m. on Tuesdays, I believe. There are a few other things where it's like everyone speaks in code. It's like thieves can't, where they're just like, I'm like, how much does this cup cost? And they're like, mao. I'm like, mao, that's like 10 cents. And they're like, well, here a mao is actually 10 kwai. And I'm like, wait, what? Because they're trying to get that plausible deniability where they're not selling stuff for huge profits or something. Anyways, it's a fun scene. I didn't go this time, but I've been 2 or 3 times. And yeah, I always really enjoy going to it. Again, this is Jingdezhen in Jiangxi. This is the origin of Chinese porcelain, one of the meccas of Chinese ceramics in China. And what I found out in the past few times I've been there, it was certainly true this time too, it's a lot of transplants. Meaning a lot of the people in Jingdezhen are not from Jingdezhen. They're people that studied ceramics somewhere, and they're getting pretty good with ceramics, and so, they hop on a bus to New York City. Into Jingdezhen, and really try their luck in like the capital of Chinese porcelain. And so it's really interesting to see kind of all the different kind of cultures melding there under the umbrella of ceramics. One consequence of this, though, is that it definitely has this Zhuangbi vibe. Zhuangbi is Chinese for pretentious. And it's like, it kind of feels like you're in art school. It feels like everyone's kind of competing with each other, trying to be a little more out there, a little more extreme. But everyone's really kind of like, this is one thing I noticed this trip. Everyone was kind of copying off each other. And so I would see a cool piece of teaware in one place, then the next place would have almost something identical to it. And then it's like, oh, can I see your studio? And they're like, no, you can't. You only can see this area. Another thing about Jingdezhen, which I've talked about maybe before, was definitely the feeling that Rainey from Serene Tea shared with me, where she was just like, it feels like they're very picky about who they do business with. Like, it's like you have to like beg them to sell you their stuff. And I don't know, like when I was in Jingdezhen the past couple times, like I have found the people I like to work with. But finding new connections in Jingdezhen is always just a headache because I'll get people that just, they don't want to play with me, you know? Like they don't want to play ball. They don't want to do business the way I'm doing business. Where it's just like, they're offering me a bad price for something that I'm like, you know, it probably isn't that much. And I'm like, I'm doing wholesale. Like, can you give me a discount if I buy more? And they're like, no, I'll sell it retail to somebody else. I'm like, okay. And so it's hard to find somebody that, you know, kind of is up my alley. I mean, we found Liu, who does like glazes. He's like a guy who just like studied, you know, design and art and just is really interested in developing new glazes. That's all he cares about. He doesn't even throw the pieces himself. He'll have somebody else throw it, he'll buy it, and then he'll just experiment like a mad scientist about glazes. And this actually is more true to the ancient style of Jingdezhen. This is where you are kind of making it in an assembly line. Like somebody's making the clay, somebody's throwing it, somebody's trimming it, somebody is glazing it, somebody's firing it. It's all different people. And so he just knows the guy who like gets the pieces up to the quality he wants, and then he'll buy a bunch and then glaze them and fire them. This is kind of more traditional than the single person craftsman kind of style in Jingdezhen at least. Another interesting thing is the Qinghua, that blue and white porcelain. I found a guy who's doing cool blue and white porcelain. He's like a Jiangxi master level. And he's doing some really cool stuff. Really friendly guy. Really excited. Took me out to eat dumplings. Master He. He's very, very sweet. And he's doing something kind of unique with his Jingdezhen style, where it's not like that old stuffy, like repeated patterns. His feel more like ink paintings. And so like I absolutely love his cups. But also like the Jingdezhen style during the Cultural Revolution, during the Maoist era, it was essentially banned. Like it was you were not allowed to make that blue and white porcelain because it was a symbol of tradition. It was a symbol of old society that needed to get expunged. And through, I think it was like Lee Jackson in the Sanbao district. I met him the first time I went to Jingdezhen purely by accident. But he was one of the guys that really brought that Qinghua out of extinction, out of being taboo, and he started kind of bringing it back into the art form, the art style of life. And really cool to see like somebody carrying the tradition and bringing it back to the forefront. Now, as I'm talking about Jingdezhen, a few things are kind of becoming more clear, right? I mentioned all of the transplants in Jingdezhen. There was one cabbie that said all the people that are making teaware are not from Jingdezhen. They're from elsewhere. Even like my favorite long-term maker, Ye Chao, he's not from Jingdezhen. I mean, he got his master's in fine arts from the Tsinghua University up in Beijing, really prestigious university. And, you know, what is he going to do? Go back to Shanxi and like sell his teaware? Like, no, he's going to go to the Mecca of teaware production and sell it there. And so he's not even from Jingdezhen, even though he's been there for, 20 years and really was there at the very beginning of the wood firing craze. The other thing is the idea of the Tsinghua being forbidden for so long and people stop making it, people forgetting how to do it, and then somebody needs to come along and renovate it, rediscover it, reverse engineer it. It's kind of strange where Jingdezhen oddly feels a little soulless. I kind of mentioned the idea that it feels pretentious because it's like a lot of the people making teaware there are not even from Jingdezhen. They're not original Jingdezhen natives. Like it feels like there was a complete break between tradition and modernity there. Anyways, it's just my feelings of Jingdezhen. I still haven't found so many cool things. I mean, I guess I found some cool makers from Jingdezhen, but this trip was not super satisfying, I guess I would say. But I did find some cool pieces of teaware. I found some cool Qinghua, met Master He. Yeah, I mean, for me, that was the first place I went to in the Year of the Dragon. The second place I went to in the Year of the Dragon, this is why I kind of did the caveat about Tao teaware. The second place I went to was Yixing. Now, Yixing I've been to a few times. It's like an hour and a half drive from where I live in Yangzhou, Jiangsu. Yixing, if you don't know, they are the world's first teapot city. Like they that's where the first teapots came out of, this like that unglazed teapot, all from Yixing, all from right on the coast, right on the shores of the Great Lake Tai, that freshwater lake in the middle of Jiangsu. And the difference between Yixing and Jingdezhen, and as much as I kind of claimed I didn't like Jingdezhen, I like it more than Yixing, which is, now I'm laughing when I'm saying that. Jingdezhen at least has innovation. Jingdezhen might not have that traditional soul, which Yixing has in abundance, but it does have new technology. It does have new life, creativity, a sense of future discoveries and future growth in it. Yixing, every time I've been to Yixing, it feels like it's a withered tree. It feels like instead of like a grafted tree that I would say Jingdezhen is. Jingdezhen is the grafted tree where the root was, or the trunk was totally severed, and then a new shoot was grown on top of that trunk. That's Jingdezhen. Yixing is an old withered tree that has just like a few leaves every spring, and it's like everyone's trying to do the same old thing. Everyone's trying to get back to tradition, back to the way it used to be. They're doing the old big teapots and the old styles, all the old shapes you get, and it's like I'm not seeing a lot of future development there. The only future development I saw was in the half-handmade studios, because with the advent of these new technologies, with the ability to make 3D printed molds of whatever you want and really start designing them to a T, I think the quality of these half-handmade Yixing teapots is phenomenal. I've had, factory one teapots and teapots that from the ancient times like 100 years ago. And it's like, sure, there's a lot to say about the clay. Sure, there's a lot to say about, the old style. It has that feeling of antique, but none of them really work well for me. Like, none of them really pour well. It's at this time, I think, oh man, I'm gonna get a target on my back here, talking about factory one like this in Yixing, and I actually went there. One of my contacts took me to the factory one, which is now a museum. I think you have to kind of realize, like, a lot of the production during that Maoist era, during that communist time, it's kind of, I've said it a few times, I guess, kind of soulless, It's like people are just kind of creating piece by piece, part by part. The art kind of gets lost. I mean, we see this in the teaware that was being produced at the time. Of course, you get some standards and everything, but the ultimate goal here is not to create the absolute finest product you can, but to create a nice, suitable product that's sufficient, that's pragmatic. The thing a lot of people like about Factory One, I believe, is the quality of the clay. And yeah, I mean, that quality of the clay can't be recreated. It was only available at a certain time, and certainly it's kind of difficult to acquire now. One of the magics about the Yixing clay is digging it up, letting it age, letting it mature and stuff, and then using it. Another difference between Yixing and other places were like Jingdezhen and Chaozhou. Jingdezhen and Chaozhou, they're throwing stuff on the wheel. And so everything's getting spun. The clay, the molecular structure of the clay, it's getting pulled. It's getting stretched. In Yixing, there's still, even with the molds, which is why an Yixing teapot that's mold made, that's half handmade, is still valuable. Because they're making it by condensing the clay. They're slapping it down, smacking it down, and the clay goes from a nice, like, thick brick into a, much more like a patty-like shape. And so through this compression of the clay, this cutting and shaping of the clay, you get a totally different structure of the clay than you would if it's spinning at a high velocity and you're pulling it. And so there is that natural difference between the Yixing clay and the any wheel-thrown clay, even, and I will say, even if it is pressed into a mold. And so when I was in Yixing, I met a really lonely tea maker, teapot maker, Miss Shen. And she just really likes a quiet life. And she'll make like 2 or 3 teapots a month and sell them for like $5,000. And so I was unable to buy any of her teapots for reselling or even for having on my own self. But it was really nice to see that insight into her life, the process she makes her teapots. I'll probably upload a video of her just carving out the spout of a teapot to YouTube. I made that video a while ago, but I didn't post it because it wasn't about tea. It was more teaware. Anyways, I'll post it on the YouTube pretty soon here. But it's really cool just to see that intense dedication to something so small as like the spout of the teapot. It was like all she did that day was one teapot spout. And I'm thinking of like the difference between that and like in Jingdezhen, like even when I filmed Yue Chao, and I have some great footage of Yue Chao throwing, and he's precise, he's perfect. It's beautiful to watch. But he can make body after body after body after body. Like he sits down at that wheel and he can come out with like 15 perfect shaped gaiwans in like 10 minutes. Where an Yixing teapotter, like that takes a different style. And one thing about Mrs. Shen, I guess, because her husband has a teapot factory and he works a little more with molds. And what was cool though is seeing like the dedication, even though you have this mold that's helping you shape a certain part of the teapot. There are people measuring the clay, condensing the clay, shaping the clay, cutting the clay, fitting it into the mold, and then cutting it off of the mold. There are other people attaching it really delicately, and finding all the seams and stuff. And so, I don't know. When you talk about handmade versus half handmade, the difference for me is it's really one on, what are you willing to pay? What are you willing to buy? How much money are you spending, and how much do you really care that one person made this instead of many people with the assistance of molds? But anyways, that's a kind of an abstract way to talk about my time in Yixing. Beyond that, Yixing felt very much like Jiangsu. It felt very much like my hometown here in Yangzhou, similar to Suzhou. The food is very mild. The people are very friendly. The pace of life is very slow. However, the difference between, again, Yixing and Jingdezhen is one is growing and the other is kind of decaying. Like Yixing, it had an old museum, the Factory 1. Jingdezhen has the old kiln that's turned into like a modern, like party district, right? With like really nice sushi bars, like cocktail bars, like cafes and restaurants, and a lot of money, a lot of shining lights and stuff is like the Jingdezhen old town. Where Yixing, it's very quiet, somber, like museums. I guess not somber, but respectful kind of museums. Yeah, so I went to Yixing in late February, early March. And so now we're getting dangerously close to spring tea season. And I think I'm already at 30 minutes here. I think I'm running into the same problem I ran into the last time I did one of these year in reviews, is I ended up talking too much about the stuff I didn't talk about. All right, I guess I already did a full podcast episode on the stuff that's going to come up here, But let's get into the tea now. And so, as I mentioned, right now it is March 6th, and it's the awakening of the insects. This is officially the beginning of the tea season, 2025. People are picking tea in Sichuan. They're growing and picking tea in Chaozhou in the Phoenix Mountains, and they're measuring the tea in the Westlake area. And right now it's like 1.5 centimeters long, the buds are. And so I think this year, in 2025, we'll have a pretty early tea season. Last year, the year in review that I'm talking about, tea season was a little late. And so really the awakening of insects comes, there's nothing going on. It's so cold, it's so rainy. This is last year. And then I'm worried it's going to start later. Everyone's freaking out because really like it doesn't start until a week and a half before the Qingming festival. Right, and I remember talking last year about how risky this is for farmers, where it's like, okay, you need to sell Mingqian teas, but you only have a week and a half instead of 3 weeks to do it. And so it does get a little more risky for them. And so I remember messaging a lot of the tea makers in like mid-March, like, hey, what's going on? They're like, nothing yet. And they're essentially low-key freaking out. They're like, yeah, we haven't even started picking, and it's after the spring equinox. It's March 22nd, and there's still no tea, and like people are posting pictures of no tea, no buds on the bushes. And so it was kind of a scary time, whereas this year it's already, it's March 6th, and there's already tea going out. And so last year I was planning on going to the Hangzhou's Westlake area the last week of March, thinking like this would be peak tea season. But I get there and it's just starting. It's just kicking off. And so it was all because of the rain, because of the cold and stuff. But I had a really good time in Hangzhou this year. This is when I met Xiao Wang, like Little Wang. Her family has a really nice tea company, and they've been living in the same area as Nine Trees. This is the Manjuelong. This is the Baihefang, the White Crane Peak. And the difference between Nine Trees and Little Wang, and why I slightly prefer Little Wang, is she is the tea maker. She is the tea making family. Where the Nine Trees, they're kind of a collective of 4 people, and only one of them is the tea maker. Only 2 of them are like Hangzhou natives, right? And so for me, the Little Wang and her 108 and her 43, I got the 108 and 43 from her last year. Those were fantastic. They checked all my boxes. I was really excited for them. But Little Wang doesn't bother with the scan the QR code kind of thing. It's kind of like a modern gimmick. If you don't know what I'm talking about, these are for the really difficult to find teas, the difficult to buy teas. There's a little QR code on some of them that make it feel authentic. And you scan the QR code, it takes you to a government website, and you enter a PIN number that's on your QR code, and it shows you where the tea is from. Now this, in theory, it really makes sense. In theory, it sounds great, where it's like, the government knows how much the yield for a certain area is, and so it can only issue so many of these QR codes. And then that directly translates to like there are only so much of this tea that can be sold. But I don't know, like I've lived in China way too long, and I've seen the amount of knockoffs and just like the ways around these regulations. I don't think there's that much oversight going into it. And I've seen people with like buying the hollow foil stickers that say like, oh, Mingqian 2014, Mingqian 2023. And I'm just like, I really just don't put my trust in that kind of stuff. But I put the trust in myself, and I put the trust in the makers. And so I guess in turn, I would have to be asking you guys, the customers, to put the trust in me that I am buying authentic teas. But if you've been listening to the 40-something episodes of this podcast, I assume you probably trust me by now. I would hope so. Or you're just having a laugh. But yeah, Little Wang is really cool. I really like her 108. This is the first year that I've really had 108, and I totally fell in love with it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there are 3 main cultivars for Dragonwell green tea, that's Longjing. There's the Trintijiang, that's the heirloom cultivar, the original cultivar that's been around forever, Chuntijiang is the latest to bloom, and so this year, like, you probably won't even get a harvest of Chuntijiang, the original heirloom cultivar, until like early April. Dragonwell 43 is more early germinating, and usually you'll get that right around the spring equinox, even sooner if you can. And the difference between the Chuntijiang and the 43 taste-wise is the 43 is a little more consistent. You get that chestnuttiness, you get a really nice umami from it. The Chuntijiang has much of the same, but it has slightly a more propensity towards that, they would call it the lanhuaxiang, the orchid fragrance. And it has a little more minerality. However, it can vary vastly from plot to plot, because these are, essentially very nearly seed propagated, wild cultivated kind of plants, right? Where the 43 is cloned. The 43 is a cloned representation of the 43 cultivar. So is the 108. The 108, as I mentioned before, is like this weird genetically modified tea plant where they took it into the lab, exposed it to gamma radiation, and kind of actually altered this plant. You're not drinking radiated teas here, but you're drinking something that is intensely artificially crafted, right? It's that natural selection or artificial selection. This is intensely artificial, where humans have taken a huge hand in changing the flavor profile of this natural tea. But I think it's beautiful. I think it tastes so good. I'm drinking a cup of it right now, and it's still satisfying because I forgot about a bag of this tea in my fridge, and I just found it like a month before the new teas are coming out. The 108 by far is my favorite of the three, though it is a little short-lived. Like, you only get like 3, 4, maybe 4 good infusions out of it. But again, the 108 for me, Dragon Ball 108 is probably one of my favorite things I discovered in 2024 about tea. And for me, after drinking tea for so long and still discovering new things, I'm totally right when I say, when Chinese people ask me why tea, I'm like, tea culture is deep. I could spend my entire life studying tea culture and barely scratch the surface of it. Like there's no end to the potential of learning about tea. And I found my holy grail. I found like what can sustain me for all of my time here, just because there's always more to learn about it. And for me, 108 was what I learned in 2024, so I'm super excited about that one. Now, after this comes a little bit of a sad tale, I guess. And so one thing I have heard about in 2024, it's essentially we're getting into a bit of a recession after COVID, after the government subsidized so much stuff to keep it afloat when they were doing that zero COVID policy and preventing people from working and companies trying not to close down. The economy here in China is really not doing well. And tea especially took a big hit. A lot of the tea makers I know have been struggling in 2024, and I really saw that with Cho. Cho, like, he's usually very, very chill, very relaxed, doesn't worry so much about selling the tea, but he did just get that really expensive new factory. And it's finally up and running, but the tea sales are just down. And so he's been doing, when I went to Fuding in 2024, he had a whole team just doing like Zhibo. Zhibo is like live streaming. It's essentially, on Douyin, TikTok. Chinese Douyin, Chinese TikTok, you can actually sell products right on it. And so he had a team with like, nice lightings, nice cameras, essentially doing the Douyin around the clock, like a night shift, a day shift, and somebody there selling tea online just constantly. And yeah, he's definitely like very eager to sell tea. And I was happy because he kind of told me, is like, like, Denqing, that's my Chinese name. When I first met you, you only bought a little bit of tea from me. And then the second year, you bought twice as much. Third year, you bought twice as much. And it's, if you keep doing this every year, in 5-10 years, you'll be my biggest customer. and he was just like so excited with like how my business has grown and how it's helped his business. And, but I have been doing it for a while. And for a long time, it was like, people like Cho were doing me the favor, selling me the tea, because I was only buying like 2 kilograms of tea, 3 kilograms of tea. But then this year, all of a sudden, I'm buying like 30 and 40 kilograms of tea, and all of a sudden, it's becoming a real, kind of like a real customer for the wholesale side of things. And getting into that, like a lot of the teas we bought from Cho this year sold out. Like it previously would take us over a year to sell out of a batch of tea cakes we pressed. This year, like the Grandmother Mountain 2.4, which is now low on stock, the Gatekeeper tea cake, like that one sold out so fast. Those are all Cho's teas, and it's like we've had a really interesting, great problem this year of keeping stuff in stock. And I think the quality of Cho's white teas, the dedication that he puts into it, the cleanliness of his factory, it all shows. I mean, there's a reason I've been working with Cho so dedicatedly for so long. He's my Wen Zitong. Like he makes the best white tea I have had in fooding, like hands down. And that's what I would say with Wen Zitong and the Dancehall oolongs. And so I'm so happy that during his difficult year, I could come around and buy more tea than I've ever bought from him, right? That really felt good. On the flip side of that, like one thing that really shows you how difficult this year was for a lot of tea makers is Zhang. I met with Zhang, had a few drinks, drank some tea, and he was like, he didn't make any tea this year. He's doing other stuff. He's doing other work to get by. Like he's not selling any new tea this year. He has old teas, but it's just like, yeah, like it's just a really difficult time for a lot of tea makers. Even in Hunan, I think we talked about this in one of the episodes with me and Alex. In Hunan, they were putting a ban on Jiating Nongchangs making tea. That's family households making tea. If you have a tea garden and you have a wok, you are not allowed to make tea unless you have approval from the provincial government. And this is just a means to kind of control the yield, because there was just too much tea on the market and it wasn't selling. And they made it so that less people made tea. And so, yeah, a difficult time for a lot of tea makers here in China. Another place that was difficult for Chinese tea makers is Yunnan. Last year is the second year of that deep drought, where by the time I get to Yunnan, this is like early March, right around the Qingmingjie. I actually have that moment where I was in Fuding for Qingmingjie, the tomb sweeping festival, the ancestor festival, where you pay respects. You go to the grave, you sweep the grave, you burn fireworks, you burn money, and you give your offerings. I observed that kind of with Cho, or I guess Cho observed it while I kind of waited around in the factory, climbed around the mountain. And then I went to Yunnan and Linsang. And I get to Linsang, we immediately go out to Kuashan. It was a difficult trip for me. I don't know if I told the story, but like I did not sleep on the midnight plane. I got into Kunming at like 5 a.m., couldn't sleep on the train, get into Linsang at like 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and I'm so tired and I just want to go to the hotel, but Lanjie takes me out to Kuashan, out to the mountain, where they're killing chickens and preparing a feast and observing their Qingmingjie. And I was able to, participate in the offering of burning money and fireworks and incense and the meals, the spirit meals to the ancestors on the mountain, which is just really a wild kind of connection to have with a tea cake, like the Kuashan tea cake, where I gave my prayers to the ancestors of the land that tea cake came from. Like it's really bizarre, because it's nothing I was prepared for, nothing I had asked for, nothing I had expected, and then there was happening. I'll see if I actually told that story, because if not, it deserves more justice than I'm saying now. I have some videos of it, but a lot of times for those more sacred kind of moments, I don't like to record it so much, right? I just leave it between me, the ancestors, the mountains, and the universe, if it will. Anyways, I think you've heard a lot of the stories from Yunnan, But it was a lot of those sleepless nights, a lot of blending teas, drinking teas until 11 or 12 p.m. and then not sleeping and thinking about the designs for the tea cake wrappers. I do a lot of that on the mountain in this kind of like sleep deprived state where I'm just like taking photos, thinking of ideas. I really love the digital collages I've been doing. And like certain tea cakes I've had in my mind for a while, like the designs I want. I really wish I would work with more artists, but that requires a lot of forethought on my part. And sometimes that's, I forget about it. I forget about it until it's like, oh, it's March 6th and new tea cakes need to be made in like the next month. I'm not going to bully an artist into making me a perfect piece of art in a month time, right? I usually like to give them plenty of time and then eventually use it. But anyways, it's my failing and it's not the artist's failing. But one thing that I'm not doing is using AI to generate these arts, which is a wild thing to kind of talk about in 2025 and 2024, 2025, like the advent of AI and where its uses are. Because I'm not against AI. I do really like it. I think it's essentially, like I'm sure the scribes hated the printing press when it came out. I was talking to a friend today, like digital editing applications like Final Cut, actual editors hated that. They were so against it. And it's like, okay, like, but now that's what everyone uses and it saves so much time. I think with AI, it's more about like, where do we apply it? Where is it useful, right? I think it's writing poetry and art. Like, let's get away from that. But anyways, I'm excited about Yunnan, Sichuanbana this year and excited about doing more blends because I think some of the blends I did last year were awesome. Like the new kicks, I'm super proud of. Other teas, I think this year will just be point and click, remakes of it. If I can find the actual same source material as things like the Dongguo, which is already sold out, and even like the New York City tap water, I really like this cake. And if I can find that same year, same material, same gushu stuff, I'll probably just press more of it instead of like trying to come up with something new. Just because, I with all of the tea cakes that are selling out, like the forbidden fruit and all of these like pu'er teas that are kind of selling out, I want them to age. I want to have the New York City tap water around for a while, right? I don't want to like it to be sold out within the same year and then I can't even taste how it ages or there's no legacy there. And so I think there's a lot to kind of think about and consider going into this year. But anyways, last year in Yunnan, I think Yunnan is one of my favorite places to go in the spring tea season, just because there's so much out there. I love the Yunnan culture. I love the climate. I love the food. I love the mountains. I love the people. Right now, it's my favorite place to be. And so after in Yunnan, I actually went to another place after Linsang. Instead of going down to Sichuanbana, I went to a little place called Jianshui. Now, Jianshui is closer to the border with Vietnam than it is to the capital of Yunnan, Kunming. And the culture there is very different. It's this like tropical kind of culture, strange foods, and they're making this oxidized or fired in reduction. I'll have to talk to Dart about that. It's this black clay, really silky, smooth, soft black clay Jianshui teapots and teaware. And I went down there looking for it, and I found a really cool group of people that were making those. And I toured their factory and I saw their setup. And what I really liked about the Jianshui teaware we got is the incredible variety. Where a lot of people, like in Jingdezhen, a lot of people are copying each other. In Yixing, people are copying modernity or copying tradition, right? Shunning modernity. And then here in Jianshui, it felt like it was just every studio was just kind of doing their own thing. And there were just like weird pieces that I would find in different studios that totally unrelated to each other. And so there was a surprisingly intricate kind of creative culture there in Jianshui, which I didn't expect to find, but I actually really liked it. And so I'm excited to do more sourcing Jianshui teaware in the future. Because this year I also went to Yixing, and the Yixing teaware scene was a lot less impressive than Jianshui, but there's quite a bit of teaware in Yixing. Affordable prices, good quality, nice little studios of people making tea. But Jianshui, I think there's a lot more there, a lot more cooler tea culture. One of the famous things they do in Jianshui is the inlay. What they'll do is they'll carve a piece or create a piece of teaware and then carve out the picture they want. And then have a bunch of different types of slip, different colored slip, like pink, white, brown, yellow, red. And then they'll essentially fill in what they've engraved with the different colors of clay. And then they'll fire that piece. And so it's not essentially painted. It's actually like clay within clay. It's inlaid. And that's a really, really fascinating technique that they're just on. They're so good at it, and no one else is doing it. And so that's definitely something on my list of things to really discover more of in 2025. So I really like that culture. However, I will tell you, I hated the food down there. I did not eat until I was full the whole time I was there. And they were like, they're nice people. And they're just like, yeah, we have the best barbecue in China. We have the best food in China. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's actually really, I have difficult time telling people I don't like their food. But anyways, after that trip, another teaware trip I didn't really talk about on the Tea Soup podcast. Maybe I'll give it more attention especially if I go back. They had peacocks there. It was a weird thing where everyone was bragging about their different exotic animals that they had. And like the studio I went to, they had a peacock. And I'm just like, that's interesting. Yeah. And a lot of like the teaware that they were selling, the reason it became so popular is they were selling it, essentially it was like a tribute teaware to the government. And so like the government had a bunch of contracts, and so people, they don't really care about selling to the public because they had really cushy government contracts for creating teaware, which is a weird kind of thing because it's like, I think that's what created a lot of the diversity, the creativity, because they didn't need to worry so much about it because all their teaware was already bought up. Like they could just do what they wanted. Anyways, cool stuff to talk about later about Jianshui. But after Jianshui, I went to another place I'd really been eager to get to. This is Sichuan. So Sichuan has kind of been the boogeyman for a lot of Chinese tea people. And I still see it, especially on Xiaohongshu, that's Red Note. Red Note to you. It's the little red book in translation. Xiaohongshu, the Chinese Instagram app, Red Note. A lot of people complain in the tea scene there that all the teas are coming from Sichuan. It's all like fake Bilochun, fake Longjing. And you'll see this kind of brought up in the West sometimes from savvy vendors like myself. That I'm just like, whoa, like, a lot of the teas that are, in these famous regions are actually coming from Sichuan. Because Sichuan, like I said, it's March 6th, and Sichuan's already making tea. And so they're first off the jump. They're able to make Bilochun before people are even picking and making Bilochun in Suzhou. And so it's always been very curious. And we did go to Sichuan. We went to Emeishan, and we saw like a few different factories. And we saw like the bosses are just like, yeah, this is where we can make Anji Baicha. This machine we use for the Bilochun. This one we can do Dragonwell, like whatever you want. Just tell us the flavor profile, the shape, even the cultivar. We grow all the cultivars here. And so I'm just thinking, I was like, okay, like, yeah, you can get Dragonwell 43 grown in Sichuan, made in the exact same shape as the Dragonwell from the Westlake area. Like and it's like, a fraction of the price. However, it's like, I'm sure it tastes different. I'm sure there's some element of that gestalt that is not the same as getting it from the original source. Or at least I hope so, maybe. But anyways, it was really cool to kind of see that, but then also to see what the people there are excited about. They're not drinking Bilo Chun there. They're not drinking Anji Bai Cha. They're not drinking, the knockoff Dragon Well that they're making. They're making that and selling it to people in Suzhou. I think we met one boss and he's like, yeah, I used to have a store in Suzhou. I'm actually from Sichuan, but I opened up a Bilo Chun shop in Suzhou and sold Bilo Chun from Sichuan. It's like amazing. I actually don't need to talk so much about the Sichuan trip because we did the whole episode. You can go back and you can listen to that with Alex. So it's probably even more entertaining than an episode with just me because it's a little more of a conversation. But you can listen to all of our hot takeaways from that. I think the first half, though, is Alex blowing your mind with modern Sichuan history, which is just wild. But yeah, and so after that, I went to Hefeng, finally touched base with all the people out in Hefeng, saw our little garden, slept in our cabin, chased away the bats. I think there were no bats because we've been living there long enough. But I was able to pick and process a micro batch of white tea by myself. And that one I'm super proud about because it was like, this is fresh from my time in Fuding, where I shadowed Cho and I saw the whole process from picking to final processing. And I was able just to duplicate that in Hubei. And I was able to make a green shomei, like a green white tea that nobody else in Hubei had been able to make. And they were like, why is it so green? And I'm like, oh yeah, it's just airflow. And they're like, oh really? And like they're showing me their methods and I'm like, oh yeah, there's not enough circulation. Like you're heaping it too thick here. And it's weird to be able to, after observing so much for so many years, just to kind of be able to intuit, I guess, where the issues are. And so yeah, I was able to make a nice little green batch of shomei white tea. It tasted great. I'm really excited about it. I was able to share it with some friends, but I really just didn't make very much of it. Yeah. After my time in Hubei, again, this is the wild time of spring where I pack my bag, one backpack, one hiking bag, and I leave home for like 30 days. And I'm out in the mountains from place to place to place. I'm washing my clothes in the sink of the hotel room, hanging them out outside to dry. This is just my life, 1 month out of the 11 months of the year. And so I don't have a whole lot of time in Hefeng. Like I'm able to make that tea and then I'm like, you know what? I need to get to Chaozhou because it's like April 20th. And the tea season is almost done in the Phoenix Mountains and I want to get there. And so I go down and I visit Wenzitong in Chaozhou in the Wudong Mountains. And the weather condition there is pretty poor. It's very, very drizzly, raining all the time, very foggy, very misty. And the amount of tea that they're making is very, very minimal. However, there were a few clear days, and that's when we made the Moli Xiang. And yeah, I remember like drinking that tea in April, and then it took me all the way until like September to actually drink the final tea. And I remember waiting for it. It felt like so long, 5-6 months before I could actually drink the final tea. But it's finally here, and I just drank it the other day, and it's fantastic. It's aging so well. We don't have very much left of it, so if you're listening to this in time, check it out, because I think it's one of the sleeper teas, one of my favorite dance songs of the year. But there's no saying if next year the Molishang is going to be as good. After coming down from the mountain in the Phoenix Mountains, I get back into Chaozhou and I revisit Kemin. Kemin is my teacher. He's a Guangdong level master in ceramics, and he's just a really, really sweet guy who makes some of the most incredible pieces of Chaozhou Shola Chahu, like the teapots, Chaozhou teapots. He has a few pieces in the museum. He's best friends with like Xie Hua, and he's part of like the old guard, like one of the guys who really started Chaozhou teapots and brought it out of obscurity and created it as an accepted, intangible culture from Chaozhou. And so he's really cool, really humble, and he has a new toy. It's a traditional wheel where you have a stick and you rotate the wheel and you spin it, and it starts going on itself. And then you throw your teapot in the middle of that wheel, and every time it slows down, you have to grab the stick and spin it again. I was able to throw a piece with come in on that. I have to check in with him and see if he actually ended up finishing it. It was turned into like a hulu gourd, but it was a fun little cooperative piece between me and my teaware making master. And I talked to all of the apprentices, and again, this is another thing is similar to Cho, where it felt good because I spent like 9 months essentially living there, going there every day for like 6 hours, throwing on the wheel, studying with them, practicing, firing in their kiln for free. They didn't charge me. Come in didn't charge me. The apprentices gave me advice. Like, it was really, truly remarkable. And eventually I started buying their teapots, right? And so far I've bought like hundreds of teapots from them and sold through Tao Teaware. And so it really feels good to kind of come back and be like, hey, like, you know, you guys taught me, you guys helped me. I didn't pay you at that time, but I've given so much back and bought so much of supported so much of your work and stuff like that. And so I was able to put in a new custom batch of teapots for that order. I was able to see some other friends like Zhang Yin Chao, who has like my same birthday. Got some teaware from him. Got a video of him throwing a kettle. Again, these videos that I'm talking about, I haven't done anything with. Like, I'm so overdue for taking these and turning them into YouTube videos. So keep an eye out for that. Let's see. And then I saw Wang Pei-shin. Wang Pei-shin was a graduated apprentice from Kunmin, and he makes some of the most beautiful, like pristine side-handled teapots. He loves burnishing them. He's definitely got a perfectionist eye to it. And that was my last stop on that 30-day trip, which is, just really, really wild. I think in the next episode, I'll meet with Alex and he'll tell us all about his recent trip to India, Darjeeling teas and the tea scene in India. I'll plug his brain for the second half of 2024 because he went to some places for yellow tea in the summertime. And then I also want to just talk about what tea he was most excited about in 2024, what kind of sample boxes he was interested in, and just kind of some takeaways from what we did in 2024 that we want to bring into 2025 with great spirit. So thank you guys for listening to this year in review of the Year of the Dragon, part 2, all about tea and largely about teaware, actually. I'm sorry if I pissed anyone off about talking about Jingdezhen in a bad way, or Yixing Factory 1 teapots, but again, that's just my view. If you want to tell me more about it, hit me up, admin@onerivertea.com. You can message me on Instagram, onerivertea.com, or Derek Poskin, or check out the YouTube. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for listening, and until next time, it's Derek from One River Tea, Tao Teaware, Empty Cup. Stay empty, guys. Brew happy. Peace.